In the heart of a small Midwestern town, where autumn leaves dance through quiet streets, Marcus Wheeler's weathered hands move with surprising grace across his workshop table. A skilled craftsman by trade, this exhausted single father spends his nights piecing together something extraordinary, custom prosthetic hands fashioned from salvaged metal and discarded machinery. His latest project isn't for profit, it's for Sarah Collins, a widow whose hands were paralyzed in a tragic riding accident. During the day, Marcus juggles his regular job and raising his daughter alone, but these late hours are devoted to creating mobility from metalwork, hope from hardware. What he doesn't know is that his act of kindness is about to trigger a chain of events that will transform both their lives forever. Could one man's selfless dedication to helping a stranger lead to something neither of them ever expected to find again? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The old farmhouse kitchen came alive at 5:30 a.m., as it had every morning for the past 3 years. Marcus Wheeler's calloused fingers wrapped around his coffee mug, the ceramic worn smooth from countless pre-dawn rituals. Through the window, darkness still clung to the maple trees that lined his modest property, their branches swaying gently in the October wind. On the refrigerator, held by a magnet from Emily's 6th grade science fair, hung a photograph that Marcus couldn't bring himself to take down. Catherine's smile still brightened the room, even if only from behind the glossy paper. She stood between Marcus and a younger Emily, her arms wrapped around them both, her gardening hat tipped rakishly to one side. That was 2 summers before the accident, back when their morning routine involved 3 plates instead of 2. The stairs creaked right on schedule. Emily never could skip that 3rd step, no matter how many times Marcus promised to fix it. At 12, she was already showing signs of becoming the spitting image of her mother. Same determined chin, same way of tucking her hair behind her ears when deep in thought. "Dad, you forgot to iron my blue sweater again," she announced, dropping her backpack by the kitchen table. The accusation carried no real weight. It was part of their morning dance, as familiar as the coffee brewing and the maple trees swaying. Marcus slid a plate of scrambled eggs across the counter. "Check the dryer, kiddo. I pulled it out last night after you went to bed." He watched as relief softened her features. The blue sweater had been Catherine's last Christmas gift to Emily, and though it was starting to show its age, their daughter refused to retire it. Emily retrieved her sweater and settled at the table, fork already in hand. "You were in the workshop late again," she observed between bites, her voice carrying that particular mix of concern and curiosity that children develop when they start realizing their parents are human too. "Had some ideas I needed to work out," Marcus replied, trying to keep his tone light. He didn't mention the stack of bills in his desk drawer or how the workshop's electricity was eating into their already tight budget. Some burdens weren't meant for 12-year-old shoulders. "For the lady with the hands?" Emily asked, her eyes brightening with interest. News traveled fast in small towns, and even faster through middle school hallways. "Jessica's mom says she used to teach piano at the community center before her accident." Marcus nodded, remembering the newspaper article that had caught his eye 3 weeks ago. Sarah Collins, it had said, former music teacher and equestrian, adjusting to life after a tragic riding accident left her hands paralyzed. The article mentioned how insurance wouldn't cover experimental prosthetics, how she was learning to adapt to a life without the simple joys of turning pages in a book or holding her morning coffee. "That's right," he confirmed, watching Emily meticulously smooth her sweater. "Sometimes people just need a helping hand, or in this case, 2 of them." Emily groaned at the dad joke, but her smile reached her eyes, Catherine's eyes. "Mom would have liked that you're helping her," she said quietly, gathering her empty plate. The words settled in Marcus's chest like a warm stone. "Yeah," he managed, turning to rinse his coffee mug before emotion could get the better of him. "Yeah, she would have." As Emily headed upstairs to brush her teeth, Marcus found himself staring at the family photograph again. He'd been a different man then. Younger, certainly, but also more carefree. The kind of man who could spend a Sunday afternoon teaching his daughter to ride a bike without worrying about overtime hours or utility bills. The kind of man who could hold his wife's hand during movie nights without feeling the phantom weight of absence. But life had other plans, and now here he was, trying to craft hope from spare parts and determination. The irony wasn't lost on him, a man who couldn't fix his own broken life, attempting to fix someone else's broken hands. Yet somehow, in the quiet hours of his workshop, surrounded by sketches and salvaged metals, he felt closer to whole than he had in years. Carlson's metal fabrication sat on the outskirts of town, a sprawling complex of corrugated steel and industrial pragmatism that had employed 3 generations of local craftsmen. Marcus pulled into his usual spot, just as the morning shift whistle cut through the dawn air. 23 years at the same workbench had earned him the corner space near the window, where pale sunlight filtered through dust motes and decades of metal shavings had worn grooves in the concrete floor. "Wheeler!" Bob Carlson's gravelly voice carried across the shop floor. "Got those irrigation components for the Morrison farm." The owner's son had taken over operations 5 years ago, but he still carried himself with the uncertain authority of the man living in his father's shadow. Marcus gestured to the neat row of custom fittings on his bench. "Finished them last night, just need final QC." He didn't mention the extra hours he'd stayed after his shift, using the industrial equipment for his personal project. Bob had a generous heart beneath his gruff exterior, but there were protocols to consider. The morning unfolded in its familiar rhythm, the whine of lathes, the sharp tang of metal shavings, the steady percussion of hammers and files. Marcus's hands moved with practiced efficiency, muscle memory developed over 2 decades of precision work. Every so often, his fingers would brush against the folded newspaper clipping in his pocket. Sarah Collins's story, which he'd read. So many times the creases were starting to tear. During his lunch break, Marcus spread his design sketches across the breakroom table. Years of crafting custom industrial components had taught him the importance of precise measurements and material. Stress points. The human hand, he'd discovered, was an engineering marvel of its own. 27 bones working in concert, each joint and tendon essential for the symphony of movement most people took for granted. "That's mighty fine detail work," came. A voice behind him. George Patterson, the shop's senior machinist, peered over Marcus's shoulder at the drawings. At 72, George was the oldest employee at Carlson's, a walking encyclopedia of metallurgy and mechanical wisdom. "Reminds me of the specialty work we did for the medical supply company back in '82. Marcus hadn't known about that contract. "Any insights?" George pulled up a chair, joints creaking like old machinery. "Surgical-grade stainless steel's your best bet for the finger joints. Less risk of rejection, better durability." He tapped a gnarled finger on the blueprint. "But you'll want something lighter for the palm assembly. Titanium alloy, maybe, if you can source it." The suggestion made sense, but Marcus's heart sank. Quality titanium was well beyond his budget, especially with Emily's orthodontist bills coming due. "I was thinking of repurposing some of the aerospace-grade aluminum from the scrap bin," he admitted. George studied him for a long moment, understanding dawning in his weathered features. "Let me make some calls. Got a buddy over at Mitchell Aviation who owes me a favor. Might be able to get you some salvage materials at cost." Before Marcus could respond, the breakroom door swung open. Bob stood there, holding the same newspaper article Marcus had been carrying. "Were you planning to tell me about this project of yours, Wheeler?" Marcus straightened in his chair, preparing to defend his after-hours use of the equipment. But Bob's expression wasn't angry. If anything, he looked intrigued. "My mother took piano lessons from Sarah Collins," Bob continued, settling his bulk against the doorframe, said she had a way of making music make sense, even to tone-deaf factory kids. He paused, studying the blueprints. Company's got some excess inventory from that medical supply run last spring. Might be able to write it off as R&D if you're willing to document the process. The offer hung in the air like metal dust in sunlight. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Not hope, exactly, but its quiet, determined cousin. "I'd need to use the precision tools after hours," he said carefully. Bob waved away the concern. "Just log your hours and clean up after yourself. And Wheeler," he fixed Marcus with a steady gaze. "Do it right. Sarah Collins gave this town a lot of music over the years. About time somebody returned the favor." As the afternoon shift wound down, Marcus found himself lingering at his workbench, running his fingers over the smooth surface of a partially completed finger joint. In the fading light, the metal seemed to hold both shadow and promise, like the first notes of a song waiting to be played, or the first words of a story waiting to be told. The Collins farmhouse stood at the end of Maple Grove Road, its white clapboard siding tinged orange by the setting sun. Marcus sat in his truck for several long minutes, his portfolio of drawings on the passenger seat, feeling suddenly inadequate. Emily had insisted on coming along, but was now uncharacteristically quiet, her earlier enthusiasm tempered by the gravity of the moment. "Ready?" he asked, more to himself than his daughter. Emily reached across and squeezed his hand. "Mom always said you could fix anything," she reminded him softly. The walkway to the front porch was lined with untended flower beds. Perennials that had once been meticulously maintained now struggled against encroaching weeds. Marcus recognized Catherine's favorite varieties: black-eyed Susans, purple coneflowers, and hardy mums. The kind of garden that told stories about its keeper. Before they could reach the door, it swung open. Sarah Collins stood in the doorway, backlit by warm interior light. She was younger than Marcus had expected, probably in her early 40s, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her hands hung at her sides, encased in protective braces that seemed too clinical, against the homey backdrop of her farmhouse. "Mr. Wheeler?" Her voice carried the measured cadence of someone used to teaching. "I saw you pull up. Please, come in." She managed a graceful step backward without using her hands, a practiced movement that spoke of months of adaptation. The living room bore testament to a life abruptly altered. Sheet music lay scattered across the coffee table, edges curling as if they hadn't been touched in months. A baby grand piano dominated one corner, its polished surface reflecting the evening light. A thin layer of dust on the keys suggested it had been silent for too long. "Emily insisted on coming," Marcus explained, settling into an offered armchair. "She's quite invested in the project." Sarah's smile reached her eyes. "You must be the Emily I've heard about from Mrs. Davidson at the middle school. She tells me you're quite the musician yourself." Emily blushed, tucking herself closer to Marcus's side. "I just started learning piano last year. Nothing special." "Every musician is special," Sarah corrected gently. "Music isn't about being the best. It's about finding your voice." She turned to Marcus, and something in her expression shifted. "Though I suppose I'm not in much position to give piano lessons these days." Marcus opened his portfolio, spreading the drawings across the coffee table. "That's actually why we're here. I've been working on a design that might help." He walked her through the technical specifications, watching her face carefully for any sign of skepticism or discomfort. "These are remarkable," Sarah said finally, leaning forward to study the detailed renderings. "But surely the cost is not your concern," Marcus interrupted, more firmly than he'd intended. "I have access to materials through work and the labor." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Let's just say I have time in the evenings." Sarah's eyes met his, and for a moment neither spoke. There was understanding in that silence, the kind that passes between people who have learned to navigate. "Loss? Why?" she asked simply. Emily answered before Marcus could. "Because Dad says sometimes people just need someone to believe in them." like how Mom believed in him when he wanted to build things instead of going to college. Sarah's composure wavered slightly. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was," Marcus said quietly. Then, clearing his throat, "I'll need to take some measurements, make sure everything's properly calibrated, and there will be multiple fittings as we progress. It won't be a quick process." "Time is something I have plenty of these days," Sarah replied, attempting to lighten the mood. But her eyes drifted to the silent piano, and the weight of all those unplayed melodies hung in the air between them. As Marcus began taking initial measurements, careful to telegraph his movements and maintain professional distance, Emily wandered over to the piano. With permission from Sarah, she picked out a simple melody, Heart and Soul, the first song Catherine had taught her. The notes filled the room like sunshine after rain, and Marcus noticed Sarah's fingers twitching slightly. In their braces, muscle memory responding to the familiar tune. In that moment, watching his daughter play while Sarah closed her eyes to listen, Marcus felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't just about building replacement hands anymore. It was about restoring the ability to create beauty, to touch lives, to transform loss into possibility. When they left that evening, the sun had fully set, but the warmth of purpose lingered. Emily hummed Heart and Soul all the way home, while Marcus's mind was already racing with refinements to his design. Neither of them noticed Sarah standing in her doorway long after they'd gone, watching their taillights disappear down Maple Grove Road, her braced hands pressed against her heart. Late night in the workshop felt different after meeting Sarah. Every piece of metal Marcus picked up now carried the weight of possibility and responsibility. The salvaged titanium from George's aviation contact lay spread across his workbench, along with precise measurements of Sarah's hands and a stack of medical research papers he'd printed at the library. The complexity was daunting. Each finger needed 3 joints, each requiring precise tension and resistance. The thumb alone involved 5 degrees of movement, and everything had to be light enough to wear comfortably while strong enough to grip a coffee mug or turn a page. "You're overthinking it," George commented during their lunch break the next day. The older man watched Marcus obsessively reviewing his calculations. "Remember what my old man used to say, metal knows what it wants to be. You just have to listen." Marcus smiled despite his frustration. "Your old man never had to build something that could play Chopin." "No," George agreed, "but he built the brackets that held up the church bells, said every piece of metal has music in it if you shape it right." He picked up one of the finger joint prototypes. "This isn't just mechanics, son. This is resurrection." The word stayed with Marcus through the afternoon shift, through dinner with Emily, through the quiet hours when the rest of the world slept. Resurrection, not just of hands, but of hope, of possibility, of music. He found himself working later each night, the soft glow of his desk lamp casting long shadows across the workshop floor. The first prototype was crude, too heavy, too rigid. The second was better, but the finger joints locked at unexpected angles. Each failure taught him something, but time was becoming as precious a resource as the titanium alloy. Emily noticed the toll it was taking. "You've got that worry wrinkle again," she observed one morning, pointing to the space between his eyebrows. "The one Mom used to kiss away." Marcus touched the spot reflexively. "Just trying to solve a puzzle, kiddo." "Maybe you need a break," she suggested, wise beyond her years. "Sarah invited us for dinner tomorrow. She said she's learned to cook with her elbows, and I promised to play her new piano piece." The invitation surprised him. They'd had several more measuring sessions, all strictly professional, though he'd noticed how Sarah's eyes lingered on his hands as he worked, studying the confident movements she hoped to regain. "I don't know, Em. There's still so much work to do. Mom always said problems look different on a full stomach," Emily persisted. "And Sarah makes really good lasagna. Jessica's mom told me." That evening, as Marcus struggled with a particularly delicate wrist mechanism, he recalled Sarah's expression when she'd watched Emily at the piano. There had been longing there, yes, but also something else. A quiet determination that matched his own. He reached for his phone, hesitated, then dialed her number. She answered on the third ring. "I hear you're making lasagna tomorrow," he said, trying to keep his tone light, with considerable elbow grease, quite literally. Her laugh was warm, genuine. "Emily seemed to think you could use a night away from the workshop." Marcus looked at the scattered components on his bench. "She might be right. Bring the prototype," Sarah suggested after a pause. "Sometimes a change of perspective helps, and—" She hesitated. "I'd like to see how it's coming along." The simple statement carried layers of meaning, hope, trust, perhaps a touch of fear. Marcus understood. Every piece he crafted was either a step toward her renewed independence or another reminder of what she'd lost. "I'll bring it," he promised, "but I should warn you, it's far from perfect." "Perfect is overrated," Sarah replied softly. "Functional would be miraculous enough." After hanging up, Marcus turned back to his workbench with renewed focus. George was right. Every piece of metal had its own song, and somewhere in the interplay of joints and springs, gears and levers, he was composing a symphony of second chances. He worked until midnight, until his eyes burned and his fingers ached, until the prototype finally moved with something approaching grace. It wasn't perfect, wasn't even close to finished, but for the first time since starting the project, he felt the quiet certainty that it would be. In the corner of his workshop, Catherine's old radio played classical music, its signals slightly, staticky but clear enough. As Marcus packed up his tools, he realized it was playing Chopin, a nocturne, he thought, though he couldn't name which one. The kind of piece Sarah might have taught in another life, the kind she might teach again. The aroma of garlic and herbs filled Sarah's kitchen, somehow making the farmhouse feel more alive. Marcus watched in quiet amazement as she transferred the lasagna from oven to counter using a system of specialized tools and careful movements. There was a grace to her adaptations, a stubborn dignity that reminded him of Catherine in those final months. "Dad brought the prototype," Emily announced, unable to contain her excitement any longer. She'd been eyeing the wrapped package Marcus had set on the coffee table since they arrived. Sarah's composure flickered briefly. "Perhaps after dinner," she suggested, but Marcus caught the tremor in her voice. "Emily, would you help me with the plates? I've developed quite a talent for carrying them with my forearms, but 3 at once is still beyond my capabilities." Over dinner, they fell into surprisingly easy conversation. Emily chatted about school, her piano lessons, her dreams of becoming an engineer like her father. "Though Dad says he's not really an engineer since he didn't go to college," she added. "Sometimes the best education comes from experience," Sarah observed, watching Marcus over the rim of her water glass. "I spent years studying music theory, but it wasn't until I started teaching that I truly understood how notes become melody." After Emily and cleared the plates, insisting it was her turn to help, Marcus unwrapped the prototype. The titanium gleamed under the dining room lights, each joint and mechanism representing countless hours of refinement. "It's not complete," he cautioned, suddenly nervous. "The finger articulation still needs work, and the wrist rotation is— It's beautiful," Sarah interrupted, leaning forward to study the intricate components. Like a sculpture, Marcus carefully lifted the prototype. "May I?" Sarah nodded, extending her right arm. The moment felt intimate somehow as he gently removed her brace and began fitting the prototype over her hand. Emily watched from the doorway, holding her breath. "The neural interface is basic," Marcus explained, adjusting straps and tensions. "It works by reading muscle movements in your forearm. You'll need to—" His voice trailed off as Sarah's fingers twitched, then slowly curled inward. The movement was jerky, imperfect, but unmistakably intentional. Sarah stared at her hand as if seeing a ghost. Tears welled in her eyes. Then there was a sharp crack, and the thumb joint locked. "No, no, no." Marcus muttered, quickly removing the prototype before it could cause discomfort. He examined the failed component, frustration etching lines around his eyes. The stress distribution is wrong. I'll need to redesign the entire joint assembly. Marcus. Sarah's voice was gentle. Look at me. He reluctantly met her gaze. Do. You know what I felt just now? She asked. Not disappointment, not failure. I felt hope. She smiled through her tears. For the first time since the accident, I felt like myself again, even if only for a moment. Emily approached quietly, placing her hand over Sarah's now empty one. Dad always says the first try is for learning, the second try is for improving, the third try is for succeeding. Your father is a wise man, Sarah said, but she was looking at Marcus with an expression that made his heart skip. Later that evening, after Emily had played her new piano piece and they'd said their goodbyes, Marcus lingered on the porch. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and possibility. I'll fix it, he promised. The joint assembly, I mean. I have some ideas for redistributing the stress load. I know you will. Sarah stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the warm light behind her. You know, I used to think losing my hands meant losing everything that made me who I was. The music, the teaching, the ability to touch lives. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But sometimes, what we think is an ending turns out to be something else entirely. The weight of unspoken things hung between them. Marcus thought of Catherine, of how she'd always insisted that love was less about grand gestures than about showing up, day after day, with an open heart and willing hands. Good night, Sarah, he said softly. Good night, Marcus, she replied. And thank you, not just for this, she gestured to her hands, but for reminding me that broken things can be beautiful too. As Marcus drove home, Emily half asleep beside him, he already had modifications sketched out in his mind. The prototype had failed, yes, but in that failure lay the seeds of success. Like a difficult piece of music, it just needed practice, patience, and perhaps a touch of grace. The Bell County Gazette wasn't known for its investigative journalism, but Rita Chen had a nose for human interest stories. She cornered Marcus outside Carlson's during his lunch break, notebook in hand and reading glasses perched precariously. On her nose, my sister took piano lessons from Sarah Collins for 6 years, Rita explained after introducing herself. Said she learned more about life than music in that farmhouse. Now I hear you're building her new hands? Marcus shifted uncomfortably, unused to attention. It's still experimental, he demurred, but Rita was already scribbling notes. Local. Craftsman pioneers innovative prosthetics for beloved music teacher, she murmured, testing the headline. Would you object to an interview? Maybe some photos of your workshop? Before Marcus could decline, Bob Carlson emerged from the factory office. Schedule it for Saturday morning, he called out. I'll have the shop cleaned up by then. He turned to Marcus with a hint of a smile. About time this town had some good news to print. The article appeared in Thursday's edition, complete with photographs of Marcus at his workbench and carefully staged shots of the prototype components. Rita had captured the technical aspects surprisingly well, but it was her description of Sarah that caught the town's attention. In the silence of her piano room, hope is being forged one finger at a time. The response was immediate. By Friday afternoon, Marcus's phone was buzzing with messages from old classmates, church members, and parents of Sarah's former students. The local hardware store offered to donate supplies. The high school robotics club wanted to interview him for their newsletter. You're famous, Dad, Emily announced at breakfast, brandishing a copy of the paper. Jessica says her mom cried when she read it. Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of increased expectations. Famous isn't exactly the word I'd choose, but the article had touched something in the community's collective heart. People stopped him in the grocery store to share stories about Sarah, how she'd taught their children to love music, how her Christmas recitals had been town traditions, how she'd never turned away a student who couldn't afford lessons. Even George's aviation contact called with an unexpected offer. "Got another batch of titanium coming in," he said. "Same deal as before, but this time I'm throwing in some specialized tools. Consider it an investment in the arts." The most surprising reaction came from Sarah herself. She appeared at his workshop door late Friday evening, holding a copy of the paper. "You didn't tell me about this," she said softly, placing the article on his workbench. "I didn't want to add pressure," Marcus admitted. "There's still so much that could go wrong." Sarah studied the photographs, her fingers hovering over the images as if she could feel the metal through the newsprint. "Do you know what Jennifer Mason's mother told me today? She said her daughter started playing piano again because of this story. Jennifer quit after my accident, said it didn't feel right without me teaching her." She looked up at Marcus, eyes bright. Sometimes hope is contagious. In the following days, more stories emerged. A local church group organized a meal train for Marcus and Emily, recognizing the long hours he was spending in the workshop. The middle school music department launched a fundraiser for Sarah's medical expenses. Even Marcus's elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, contributed by watching Emily on evenings when prototype fittings ran late. "It takes a village," George observed during their Monday lunch break, reading the latest update in the paper. Though, in this case, looks like the village was just waiting for someone to take the first step. Marcus thought about that as he worked. The steady rhythm of his tools accompanied by the classical music Sarah had recommended. Pieces she hoped to play again someday. Each component he crafted now carried not just his own hopes, but the collective wishes of an entire community. That evening, as he refined the troublesome thumb joint that had failed during the first fitting, Emily sat at his workbench doing homework. "My teacher says we should write about local heroes for our English assignment," she mentioned casually. "I'm writing about you and Sarah." Marcus paused in his work. "We're not heroes, kiddo." Emily looked up from her notebook, fixing him with Catherine's determined gaze. "Heroes aren't just people who save the world, Dad. Sometimes they're people who help others find their song again." The words settled over the workshop like a benediction, mixing with the metallic tang of possibility and the distant strains of Chopin floating from the old radio. The bills arrived on a Tuesday, an innocuous stack of white envelopes that felt like lead in Marcus's hands. Emily's orthodontist, the property tax assessment, the electricity bill that had doubled since he started spending nights in the workshop. Numbers that refused to add up, no matter how he arranged them. His hands trembled slightly as he sorted through them at the kitchen table. The community's support had been overwhelming, but pride had kept him from accepting most of the offered financial help. Catherine had always said a man's worth wasn't measured by his wallet, but by his actions. Still, actions couldn't pay for Emily's braces. The sound of metal hitting concrete echoed through Carlson's the next morning as Marcus's exhaustion finally caught up with him. The precision-calibrated joint assembly he'd spent 3 nights perfecting clattered across the floor, irreparably damaged. "Wheeler!" Bob's voice cut through the fog of Marcus's fatigue. "My office! Now!" The walk across the shop floor felt endless. Every eye followed him. George's concerned frown, the younger workers' curious glances, the quiet murmur of conversation in his wake. In 23 years, he'd never been summoned to the office like this. Bob was standing behind his desk, holding Marcus's time cards from the past month. "You're logging 16-hour days," he said without preamble, "falling asleep at your station, making mistakes that could cost you fingers." He tossed the cards onto the desk. "I can't have my best craftsman burning out over this project. I'll replace the damaged components," Marcus started, but Bob waved him silent. "This isn't about the damn components." Bob ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Look, my mother called this morning. Talked my ear off about Sarah Collins." "About what?" "This project means to the community. But you know what she really wanted to discuss? She's worried about you." Marcus stared at his hands, calloused and scratched. Everything he was reflected in their worn surface. "I can handle it." "No, you can't. And you don't have to." Bob pulled out a folder. The board met yesterday. We're officially classifying the prosthetics project as company R&D. That means you work on it during regular hours, with full pay and benefits. He held up a hand to forestall Marcus's protest. We're also setting up a proper testing facility in the East Wing. No more late nights in that cramped workshop of yours. The offer was overwhelming. Marcus felt something crack in his carefully maintained facade. I can't accept. This isn't charity, Bob interrupted firmly. This is investment in innovation. Do you know how many people could benefit from affordable custom prosthetics? Sarah Collins isn't the only one waiting for a miracle. Marcus thought of Sarah at her piano, of Emily watching him work late into the night, of Catherine's voice in his memory, telling him it was okay to accept help sometimes. There's something else, Bob continued more gently now. Sarah came by. The office yesterday. Marcus's head snapped up. She's worried about you too. Said you missed your last fitting session. Fell asleep at your bench instead. Bob leaned forward. She also mentioned that Emily's been staying with neighbors more often than not. The words hit Marcus like physical blows. He hadn't meant to. Missed the fitting. Hadn't realized Emily was spending so much time away. When had he last helped her with homework? Listened to her practice piano? I'm not trying to make you feel guilty, Bob said, reading his expression. I'm trying to help. You find balance. This project matters to Sarah, to the community, to the future of this company, but it can't come at the cost of everything else. Marcus felt the weight of sleepless nights and skipped meals, of unpaid bills and missed moments with Emily. The careful walls he'd built around his exhaustion began to crumble. His voice cracked. I need to make this work for Sarah, for Emily, for Catherine, Bob suggested quietly. Marcus nodded, unable to speak. Then let us help. Let the community support you the way you're supporting Sarah. Bob pushed a set of keys across the desk. East Wing is yours starting tomorrow. Regular hours, proper equipment. And Wheeler? He waited until Marcus met his gaze. Go home early today. Take Emily to that dinner Sarah's been trying to schedule. Remember why you started this project in the first place. Outside Bob's office, George was waiting with a cup of strong coffee and understanding in his weathered face. Sometimes, the older man said, the strongest thing a man can do is admit he can't do it alone. Marcus took the coffee with trembling hands, its warmth seeping into his bones like hope, like permission to breathe again. Sarah stood at her kitchen window, watching the sunset paint the autumn sky in shades of amber and gold. The manila envelope on her counter seemed to pulse with possibility, its contents representing both past and future. Her attorney's careful handwriting marked it as Collins Estate Documentation. The sound of tires on gravel drew her attention. Marcus's truck pulled up, Emily's bright face visible in the passenger window. They'd been coming for dinner more regularly since Bob's intervention. 2 weeks ago, a new rhythm establishing itself in their shared lives. I made pot roast, Sarah announced as they entered, proud of her latest adaptation. The new slow cooker has controls I can manage with my elbows. She didn't mention the mess in her kitchen from earlier failed attempts, or how each small victory felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. Emily immediately gravitated to the piano, her practicing now a comfortable routine in Sarah's home. The notes of her latest piece, a simplified version of Beethoven's Für Elise, filled the space between them as Marcus helped set the table. You're looking better, Sarah observed, noting the reduced shadows under his eyes. The new workshop. Arrangement seems to be helping, Marcus nodded, arranging silverware with practiced precision. Bob's support has been unexpected, but welcome. He paused, watching Sarah maneuver serving spoons with her modified grip. The prototype's coming along faster now, the thumb joints finally responding correctly to neural impulses. Sarah set down the spoon she'd been balancing. Marcus, there's something we need to discuss. She gestured to the manila envelope. Would you mind bringing that to the table? Over dinner, Sarah explained about her late husband's investments, about the trust fund that had laid dormant since the accident. Thomas was always planning for the future, she said softly. Even when we couldn't have children of our own, he wanted to make sure there would be resources for something meaningful. She waited until Emily was back at the piano before continuing. The trust has specific provisions for medical innovation and education. Her eyes met Marcus's. It's meant to fund exactly this kind of project. Marcus set down his fork. Sarah, I can't. This isn't about you, she interrupted gently. It's about legacy. Thomas believed in investing in people who make a difference. And it's not just about my hands anymore, is it? Bob's right. This could help so many others. She reached for the envelope with her braced hands, the movement awkward but determined. There's something else. The farm next to yours. The old Peterson place? I bought it last week. Marcus stared at her, uncomprehending. It has that beautiful old barn, Sarah continued. With some renovation, it would make an ideal workshop. Plenty of space for proper equipment, room for expansion. She took a deep breath. And the farmhouse, well, it needs a family. The implications hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. I'm not offering charity, she said firmly, echoing Bob's words. I'm offering partnership. A chance to turn your craftsmanship into something bigger, something lasting. Her voice softened. Emily could have her own room for a piano. From the living room, for Elise continued. Emily's careful practice providing a soundtrack to the moment. Marcus looked at his hands. Capable, calloused, created for precisely this purpose, though he hadn't known it until now. Why? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Sarah's eyes drifted to the piano, to Emily's concentrated form at the keys. Because you gave me back my hope, she said simply. And not just hope for new hands, but hope for... She hesitated. Vulnerable. For everything. The word hung between them, carrying echoes of lonely dinners and silent pianos, of workshop nights and shared understanding, of possibility. There's no pressure to decide now, Sarah added quickly. The trust documentation needs review. The property requires inspection. Yes, Marcus interrupted quietly. Sarah's breath caught. Yes, to all of it. He met her gaze steadily. The trust, the workshop, the partnership, everything. Emily's music faltered, then stopped. They turned to find her standing in the doorway, eyes bright with unshed tears. Does this mean... She started, then stopped, afraid to voice her hope. Sarah opened her arms, and Emily flew into them, careful of the braces but eager for the embrace. Marcus watched them, his heart full of something that felt remarkably like coming home. Later, as Emily played them into the evening, Sarah's fingers twitched in their braces, marking rhythm and possibility. Marcus reached across the space between their chairs, covering her braced hand with his own. No words were needed. Their hearts, like their futures, were already in sync. The new workshop in Carlson's East Wing hummed with possibility. Morning light streamed through industrial windows, illuminating the precise array of tools and machinery Bob had allocated to the project. Marcus stood before his workbench, holding the latest prototype in trembling hands. Run the diagnostics again, George suggested from his perch on a nearby stool. The older man had taken to spending his lunch breaks watching Marcus work, offering decades of mechanical wisdom between bites of his sandwich. Marcus initiated the neural response test for the 7th time that morning. The titanium fingers flexed, smoothly, each joint moving with a grace that had eluded previous versions. The thumb, once their greatest challenge, now curved in a perfect opposition grip. It's ready, he whispered, almost afraid to believe it. George set down his sandwich and approached the bench, examining the prototype with expert eyes. Better than ready, he declared. It's singing. The drive to Sarah's farmhouse felt surreal. Marcus had called ahead, trying to keep his voice steady as he told her they'd had a breakthrough. Now, with the prototype secured in its padded case, beside him, his heart thundered against his ribs. Sarah was waiting on the porch, Emily beside her. They must have come straight from piano practice, sheet music still clutched in Emily's hands, her face bright with anticipation. The autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and possibility. Inside, Marcus set the case on the coffee table with ceremonial care. Sarah sat across from him, her braced hands folded in her lap, composure masking the hope he could see in her eyes. "The neural interface is more responsive now," he explained, removing the prototype. "We've refined the pressure sensors and improved the joint articulation. The weight distribution is—" He stopped, recognizing the technical details for what they were, a shield against overwhelming emotion. "Show me," Sarah said softly. With gentle precision, Marcus removed her right brace. The process had become familiar over months of fittings, but this time felt different, sacred almost. Emily perched on the piano bench, holding her breath. The prototype slid into place like it had been waiting for this moment. Marcus secured the neural sensors, checking and double-checking each connection. "Remember how we practiced?" he prompted. "Start with the thumb." Sarah closed her eyes, concentrating. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, deliberately, her thumb curved inward, not the jerky movement of previous attempts, but a smooth, controlled motion. Emily gasped. One by one, the other fingers responded. Index, middle, ring, pinky. Each movement precise, each flex and extension exactly as intended. Sarah opened her eyes to watch as she formed her first proper fist in over a year. "Try the piano position," Marcus suggested, his voice rough with emotion. Sarah extended her fingers, arranging them in the familiar curve over imaginary keys. The movement brought tears to her eyes. It feels like my hand," she whispered. "That's because it is your hand now," Marcus replied. "We just had to help it remember." Emily approached slowly, holding out a pencil. "Can you?" she asked, unable to finish the question. Sarah reached for the pencil. The grip was perfect, not too tight, not too loose. Natural. She drew a treble clef on the margin of Emily's sheet music, the symbol shaky but unmistakable. The sound that escaped her was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Marcus found himself blinking back tears as Emily threw her arms around them both, creating a circle of shared joy and triumph. "The left hand still needs final adjustments," he managed, ever the perfectionist. "And we'll need to run more tests, make sure the neural interface maintains stability over time." "Marcus," Sarah interrupted, her voice tender, "stop thinking like an engineer for a moment. Look." She stood, walking to the piano with a confidence he hadn't seen since their first meeting. The prototype gleamed in the afternoon light as she positioned her hand over the keys. The first notes of heart and soul filled the room, hesitant at first, then gaining strength. Not the full piece, not yet, but the simple melody line that had haunted his workshop during long nights of failure and refinement. Emily scrambled onto the bench beside her, adding the lower harmony she'd practiced so many times. Their hands moved together across the keys, prototype and flesh, creating music that felt like miracle. Marcus watched them play, remembering Catherine's words about love being about showing up, about believing in possibility. In the gentle autumn light, surrounded by music and joy, he understood finally what she'd meant. Some things couldn't be engineered or calculated. Some things had to be felt, had to be lived, had to be played by heart. The Peterson farm looked different in the crisp morning light, its weathered buildings holding promise rather than decay. Marcus stood beside Sarah at the property line, watching Emily explore the old barn with the boundless enthusiasm of youth. "Jutted, foundations solid," Sarah explained, her prototype hand gesturing with growing confidence. "The previous owners maintained it well, even after they stopped farming, and the acoustics in that barn," she smiled, "perfect for a workshop, or perhaps even a small recital space." Marcus studied the sprawling property, trying to see it through. Her eyes. The barn's massive doors hung true on their tracks, the roof looked sound, and the location, adjacent to his own modest plot, was ideal. Still, the scope of what Sarah was suggesting made him dizzy. "It's too much," he protested weakly, but Sarah was already moving toward the farmhouse, her steps sure despite the uneven ground. Do you know what I've learned this past year? She called over her shoulder. That too much is just another way of saying exactly right when you're afraid to accept what you deserve. Inside, sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating hardwood floors that had withstood generations of footsteps. The living room was spacious enough for a piano Sarah had already measured, and the kitchen held echoes of family dinners and shared laughter. Emily's room would be upstairs, Sarah continued, her voice soft with possibility. The one with the bay window. Perfect for a reading nook, don't you think? And there's space for a music room, a proper home office. Sarah, Marcus interrupted gently, this isn't just about the workshop, is it? She turned to face him, vulnerability and determination warring in her expression. No, she admitted, it's not. Before either could speak further, Emily's voice rang out from the back porch. Dad! Sarah! Come look at the garden! They found her kneeling beside an overgrown flower bed, carefully brushing dirt from something metal. It's Mom's wind chimes, she announced, holding up the tarnished tubes, the ones that went missing during the storm last spring. They must have blown over here. Marcus remembered those chimes. Catherine had hung them the week they'd moved into their house, claiming their song would make the garden grow better. Their loss had hit Emily hard, another small piece of her mother slipping away. They're perfect for the herb garden, Sarah said, kneeling carefully beside Emily. With her prototype hand, she helped the girl untangle the chimes. Your mother was a gardener too. Emily nodded enthusiastically. She taught me all about companion, planting, basil with tomatoes, marigolds to protect the vegetables. She paused, looking between the adults with sudden understanding. We could plant a garden here, couldn't we? A big one, with flowers and vegetables and maybe even a greenhouse. Like Mom always wanted? Sarah met Marcus's gaze over Emily's head. We could, she said softly, if your father agrees. The weight of the moment settled around them like autumn leaves. Marcus looked at the wind chimes, at the way Sarah and Emily's hands worked together to restore them, at the space between his property and this one that seemed to be shrinking with each passing second. The barn would need extensive renovation, he said finally, his practical nature asserting itself. And the house is ready whenever we are, Sarah finished. Her cheeks colored slightly at the implied we, but she didn't look away. The trust can cover the renovations. Bob's already approved the equipment transfer, and Emily could have her own piano, Emily interjected, grinning, and a garden, and maybe, she hesitated, then forged ahead with childish directness. Maybe a family that's not broken anymore? The question hung in the air, like music waiting to be played. Marcus felt tears prick at his eyes as Sarah reached for his hand with her prototype one. The grip was perfect, firm enough to offer support, gentle enough to allow choice. Catherine always said home isn't a place, he said roughly. It's the people who help you grow. Sarah's fingers tightened around his. Then maybe it's time to plant some new roots, she suggested. Together, the wind picked up, setting the rescued chimes, singing. Their melody carried across the property, past the barn with its workshop potential, around the farmhouse with its empty rooms waiting to be filled, through the overgrown garden holding memories and possibilities alike. Emily hung the chimes. On the porch post, their silver song blessing this moment of transition. Mum would have liked this, she declared with absolute certainty. She always said love grows best in tended gardens. Marcus pulled his daughter close with his free arm, creating a circle with Sarah that felt like completion. Yes, he agreed, finally allowing himself to embrace this new beginning. Yes, she did. The grandfather clock in Sarah's living room chimed 6 as she attempted the scales again. Each note was deliberate, a triumph of engineering and determination. The prototype hands, both of them now, moved across the keys with increasing fluidity, though not yet with her former grace. You're rushing the transition, she muttered to herself, a teacher's instinct for rhythm asserting itself. Start again. C major, quarter notes, even tempo. The sound of Marcus's truck in the driveway broke her concentration, but not her smile. These evening practices had become their ritual. Sarah at the piano, Marcus bringing dinner after work, Emily spreading her homework across the coffee table as if she'd always belonged here. "It's getting better," Emily announced, dropping her backpack by the door and hurrying to the piano. "I can tell the difference from yesterday." Sarah flexed her prototype fingers, still amazed by their responsiveness. "The muscle memory is there," she explained. "It's just a matter of teaching these new hands to access it." Marcus appeared in the doorway, carrying takeout containers that filled the room with the aroma of garlic and herbs. "Luigi's sends their congratulations," he said, setting down the food. "Maria insisted on extra breadsticks when I told her you'd managed a full octave." They gathered around the kitchen table, falling into their comfortable routine. Emily chatted about her school day while Marcus distributed plates, his movements synchronized with Sarah's as if they'd been sharing meals for years instead of months. "Ms. Davidson asked if you'd consider teaching again," Emily mentioned between bites of fettuccine. "Now that you can—" She gestured to Sarah's hands. Sarah paused, pasta halfway to her mouth. The prototype gripped the fork with perfect pressure, not too tight, not too loose. A small miracle she was still getting used to. "I hadn't thought about it," she admitted, "though I suppose the piano isn't just for practice anymore. The barn renovation could include a teaching space," Marcus suggested carefully, "if you wanted. The acoustics are already perfect, according to someone who knows about these things." Sarah's prototype hands trembled slightly, but held steady. These moments still caught her off guard. Not just the growing capabilities of her new hands, but the way Marcus and Emily had woven themselves into her future plans, filling empty spaces she'd thought would remain hollow forever. "I'd need to practice more," she said, but her tone was thoughtful rather than dismissive. "Build up stamina, refresh my repertoire. We could practice together." Emily's enthusiasm bubbled over. "I mean, if you wanted to start small, maybe just one student who already comes over all the time anyway." Marcus chuckled. "Subtle, kiddo." After dinner, while Emily worked on her math homework, Sarah returned to the piano. This time, instead of scales, she attempted the piece she'd been secretly practicing during her morning sessions. The opening notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata filled the room, slower than the traditional tempo, but clear and intentional. Marcus stopped washing dishes to listen, his hands stilling in the soapy water. Sarah felt his presence behind her, solid and supportive, as her prototype fingers found their way through the familiar melody. "I still can't manage the third movement," she said softly, not stopping. "Too many rapid sequences, but this—" The music swelled slightly, gaining confidence. "This feels like coming home." "It's not about speed," Marcus replied, his voice rough with emotion. "It's about healing. Everything else will follow." The moonlight filtering through the windows caught the titanium of her hands, making them glow against the ivory keys. Sarah remembered the first time she'd played this piece, decades ago in her parents' house. How it had felt like speaking a new language, like unlocking a door to another world. Now, with these hands that Marcus had crafted with equal parts engineering and love, she was learning that language again. Different, yes, but no less beautiful. For the difference, Emily appeared beside the piano, math homework forgotten. "Can you teach me that part?" she asked, pointing to where Sarah's right hand had just completed a particularly smooth passage. "Here," Sarah said, sliding over on the bench. "Watch my hand position. It's all about the wrist angle." As she guided Emily through the sequence, Sarah caught Marcus watching them, his expression soft, with something that looked remarkably like contentment. Their eyes met over their daughter's concentrated form, and the word "there" no longer felt presumptuous or frightening. The Moonlight Sonata became a duet, Emily's hesitant notes weaving through Sarah's more confident ones. Outside, autumn was painting the world in shades of transition, but in here, in this room filled with music and shared understanding, everything felt perfectly, wonderfully settled. The article in the medical journal arrived on a Thursday, sandwiched between Emily's school newsletter and a hardware store flyer. Bob had insisted on documenting the project, bringing in professional photographers to capture every aspect of the prototype development. Now, seeing it laid out in precise technical detail, Marcus could hardly believe how far they'd come. Revolutionary approach to neural response prosthetics in a small-town setting, Sarah read over his shoulder, her prototype hand steady as she poured their morning coffee. They made you sound quite impressive, Mr. Wheeler. They made us sound impressive, he corrected, noting how the article emphasized their collaboration, his engineering expertise and her musical background, creating something neither could have achieved alone. Though I could have done without the photo shoot, Sarah smiled, remembering how uncomfortable he'd been in front of the cameras. The one of you and Emily in the workshop turned out nice. Very father-daughter engineer team. The phone rang before he could respond. It was George, his voice crackling with excitement. "Turn on channel 7, the older man instructed. They're running the story. The local news segment was brief but powerful. Sarah at her piano, playing a simplified version of Chopin while the reporter explained the technology. Marcus in the workshop, describing his inspiration. Emily proudly showing off her father's designs to her science class. Since the story broke this morning, George continued, we've had calls from 3 different hospitals and a veterans rehabilitation center. They want to know if we can adapt the design for other applications. Marcus sat heavily in his kitchen chair. Other applications? Think about it, Sarah said softly, sitting beside him. What you did for my hands, that basic principle could work for any number of specialized prosthetics. Musicians, artists, craftspeople. The company's setting up a proper research division, George added. Bob wants you to head it. Says it's time Carlson's metal fabrication joined the 21st century. After hanging up, Marcus stared at his hands, craftsman's hands that had somehow become something more. Sarah reached across the table, her prototype fingers intertwining. With his real ones. I always knew you were building more than just hands, she said. The implications unfolded throughout the day. Rita Chen from the Bell County Gazette arrived for a follow-up story, this time focusing on the community impact. She interviewed Sarah's first student, a returning veteran who'd lost fine motor control in one hand during his service. Never thought I'd play guitar again? James Murphy told the reporter, demonstrating the modified prototype Marcus had developed for string instruments. Now my kids are begging me to stop practicing. The high school robotics club asked if Marcus would be a guest speaker. The local medical center wanted to discuss a partnership. Even Mrs. Patterson, Marcus's elderly neighbor, wondered if similar technology might help her arthritic hands manage her beloved gardening tools. That evening, as they walked through the partially renovated barn, Sarah's prototype hands traced the outline of what would become their new workshop space. We'll need more room than we thought, she observed. Perhaps a waiting area here, consultation room there. You're thinking of a proper clinic, Marcus realized. Why not? You have the expertise. Bob has the manufacturing capabilities, and She paused, then continued with quiet confidence. I know what it means to lose something essential to your identity, and what it means to get it back. Emily burst in from the farmhouse, waving a paper excitedly. Dad, I got an A+ on my science presentation. Ms. Williams says my explanation of neural interfaces was remarkably thorough for a middle school student. Marcus hugged his daughter, marveling at how she'd bloomed in recent months. She'd always been bright, but watching the project develop had sparked something new in her, a passion for problem-solving that reminded him of Catherine's determination. We should celebrate, Sarah declared, both the A+ and the news coverage. I think I can manage that chocolate cake recipe now that the finger control is better. As they walked back to the farmhouse together, the setting sun painting long shadows. Across their merged properties, Marcus felt the weight of possibility settling around them. Not just the possibility of helping others, though that was profound enough, but the possibility of this, this family they were building, this future they were crafting together, as carefully and precisely as any prosthetic. "Dad!" Emily's voice broke into his thoughts. "Do you think Mom would be proud of all of this?" Marcus looked at Sarah, at the house that would soon be their shared home, at the workshop that would help others regain what they'd thought lost forever. "Yeah, kiddo," he said softly. "I think she'd be very proud indeed." The box had been in Sarah's attic for over a year, untouched since the accident. Now, with her prototype hands steady and sure, she lifted the lid. Inside, carefully preserved letters lay bundled in faded ribbon, her correspondence with Thomas during their courtship and early marriage. "I found them while packing up the piano room," she explained to Marcus, who sat beside her on the living room floor. Emily was at a friend's house for the evening, giving them a rare moment of privacy. "I couldn't bear to read them after everything, but now," her prototype fingers, growing more dexterous by the day, untied the ribbon. The first letter was dated 20 years ago, written in Thomas's precise handwriting. "My dearest Sarah, the concert was magnificent, but not as magnificent as watching you teach young Michael to play his first scale today." Marcus started to stand, giving her space, but Sarah caught his hand. "Stay," she said softly. "Please, I'd like to share this with you." Together they read through the letters, Thomas's joy at their wedding, his heartbreak when they learned they couldn't have children, his pride in Sarah's teaching career. The last letter, written just weeks before the riding accident that took his life and left her hands paralyzed, spoke of future plans and endless love. "He would have liked you," Sarah said, carefully returning the letters to their box. "He always believed in people who could create beauty from ordinary things." Marcus was quiet for a moment, then stood and walked to his jacket hanging by the door. From the pocket, he withdrew a worn leather wallet. Inside, carefully preserved behind plastic, was a note written in delicate handwriting. "Catherine left this in my toolbox," he explained, returning to sit beside Sarah. "The morning of the accident, she always left me little notes, but this was the last one." Sarah's prototype hands trembled slightly as she accepted the wallet. The note was simple. "Remember, you can fix anything except a sunrise, and that fixes itself. Love you always, see." "She was right about you," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "You can fix almost anything." "Not everything," Marcus admitted, roughly. "Couldn't fix her cancer, couldn't fix Emily's heartbreak, couldn't even fix that damn creaky step that Catherine always complained about. But you kept trying," Sarah pointed out. "You're still trying, that's what matters." She gestured to her prototype hands. "These aren't just replacements for what I lost. They're proof that broken things can become something new, something different, but maybe just as beautiful." Marcus touched the note in his wallet. "I used to think moving forward meant leaving the past behind, like I was somehow being disloyal to Catherine's memory by—" He hesitated, then forged ahead, "by falling in love again." The word hung between them, delicate and powerful. Sarah's prototype hands found his, the metal warm from her body heat. "I felt the same way," she admitted, "as if opening my heart. Again, somehow diminished what Thomas and I had. And now? Now I think love isn't a finite resource. It's more like music, each piece unique, but adding to the overall symphony." She smiled softly. "Thomas taught me to love music. You taught me to believe in second chances." Marcus looked at their intertwined hands, flesh and metal, past and future. "Catherine always said life was like one of my projects. Sometimes you have to break something down completely before you can rebuild it stronger." Sarah stood, gently pulling him up with her. In the soft evening light, she led him to the piano. Her prototype hands moved across the keys with growing confidence, playing the beginning of Heart and Soul, their song in its way. "Emily told me something interesting yesterday," she said as she played. "She said she doesn't think of us as broken anymore, just reconstructed, like your prototypes, taking what worked before and making it into something new." Marcus wrapped his arms around her from behind, feeling the music vibrate through both their bodies. Wise kid. She had good teachers. Sarah leaned back against him, still playing, in all the ways that matter. They stayed like that as darkness fell. Sarah's hands creating music while Marcus held her, both of them surrounded by memories of love's past and the warm promise of love present. Outside, autumn wind stirred the wind chimes, Catherine's chimes now hanging on their shared porch, creating a gentle counterpoint to the piano's song. Two different melodies, weaving together into something new, something whole. The business proposal sat on Bob Carlson's desk, its pages crisp and professional, thanks to Sarah's careful editing. Marcus stood at the window of the office, watching the autumn leaves scatter across the factory parking lot while Bob read through. The details of what would become Carlson's Medical Innovation Division. Full production facility, Bob mused, flipping through the projections. Research and development lab, custom fitting area, rehabilitation space. He looked up at Marcus. This is more than just a department. You're talking about transforming the entire company. The prosthetics market is underserved, Marcus replied, turning from the window. Especially for specialized applications, musicians, artists, craftspeople, people who need more than basic functionality. They're out there, Bob. Sarah's story proved that. Bob nodded slowly, reaching the financial section. The trust funding is substantial, he acknowledged. And with the medical journal coverage, we're already getting inquiries from hospitals across 3 states. He tapped the papers thoughtfully. But that's not why you're doing this, is it? Marcus thought of Sarah at her piano, of Emily's growing interest in engineering, of the veteran learning to play guitar again. No, he admitted, it's not just about business. Good. Bob stood, extending his hand. Because neither is this company. Dad always said we're not just making products, we're making possibilities. He smiled. Speaking of Dad, he called this morning. Says he's coming out of retirement to consult on the project, something about not trusting the younger generation with all the fun. The weight of the moment settled around them, not just the business opportunity, but the chance to create something lasting, something meaningful. Marcus shook Bob's hand, feeling the future solidify with the gesture. Outside the office, George was waiting with knowing eyes. About time, the older man said gruffly. Was getting tired of watching you split yourself between regular production and this dream of yours. It's not just my dream anymore, Marcus replied, thinking of all the people who had become part of this journey. That evening, he drove to Sarah's farmhouse, soon to be their farmhouse, with the signed contracts in his jacket pocket. Emily was already there, the sound of her piano practice mixing with the aroma of Sarah's cooking as he walked in. Well? Sarah asked, her prototype hand steady as she stirred something that smelled like his mother's old beef stew recipe. Marcus pulled out the contracts. Bob's announcing it next week. Carlson's Medical Innovation Division with full funding and support. He paused, watching her face. If you're still sure about the partnership. Sarah set down her spoon and turned to face him fully. Marcus. Wheeler, if you're asking me one more time if I'm sure about any of this, the division, the farm, us, I'm going to have to demonstrate just how precisely calibrated these prototype hands are. From the living room, Emily's practice stopped. Did he say yes? Are we really doing this? We're really doing this, Marcus confirmed, pulling his daughter into a hug as she rushed into the kitchen. All of it. Sarah joined their embrace, her prototype hands cool against his neck. You know what this means, don't you? She asked, eyes twinkling. We're going to need a bigger workshop. Emily bounced with excitement. Can I have my own workbench for the designs I've been working on? Marcus raised an eyebrow. Designs? I've been thinking about pediatric applications, Emily explained, suddenly serious. Kids need different things from their prosthetics. More durability, room for growth, maybe even customizable appearances. Marcus and Sarah exchanged glances over their daughter's head. Sounds like someone's been planning ahead, Sarah observed. Well, yeah. Emily's tone suggested this should have been obvious. Dad always says the best projects need 3 things. Good plans, good people, and good hearts. We've got all three, right? Marcus looked around the kitchen, at Sarah's prototype hands creating their dinner, at Emily's notebooks filled with design ideas, at the family they'd built from broken pieces and brave hearts. Yeah, kiddo, he said softly, we've got all three. Later, after Emily had gone to bed, Marcus and Sarah stood on the porch of what would soon be their shared home. Her prototype hands were interlaced with his real ones, both equally capable of creating, nurturing, loving. No more doubts? She asked, reading his quiet mood. Marcus squeezed her hands gently. No doubts, he confirmed. Just gratitude, and maybe a little awe at how fixing your hands somehow fixed everything else too. Sarah leaned into him, humming the first bars of Heart and Soul. Not fixed, she corrected. Transformed into something even better than before. Above them, stars wheeled in the autumn sky, witnesses to this moment of decision, of commitment, of love, reconstructed into something new and beautiful and strong. Moving day dawned clear and cool, the kind of autumn morning that Catherine had always loved. Marcus stood in his empty living room, surrounded by labeled boxes and memories, while Sarah's prototype hands gently lifted the last family photographs. From the walls, you know, she said softly, carefully wrapping Catherine's picture in bubble wrap. I think she would approve of where these are going. The bay window in the farmhouse gets the same morning light. Emily appeared in the doorway, carrying a box marked Workshop, Precision Tools. Mom's wind chimes are already up on the new porch, she reported, and I found the perfect spot for her garden bench, right where we can see it from the kitchen window. The decision to merge their households had come naturally after the business. A partnership was finalized. The farmhouse had plenty of room, and as Sarah pointed out, it made sense to have the workshop and living space connected. Still, watching the moving truck fill with his life's possessions stirred something deep in Marcus's chest. Having second thoughts? Sarah asked, reading his expression with her teacher's intuition. No, he replied honestly, just remembering. Catherine and I moved in here right after we got married. Emily took her first steps in that doorway. Sarah's prototype hand found his, the metal warm from her body heat. Then we'll take those memories with us, make them part of our new story. The moving crew, volunteers from Carlson's, led by George himself, worked efficiently through the morning. Bob stopped by with coffee and donuts, using the excuse of discussing the new division's timeline to check on their progress. Dad's already redesigning the East Wing, he reported, watching his workers carefully transport Sarah's piano. Says if we're going to do this, we're doing it right. State of the art, everything. Speaking of doing things right, Sarah interjected, her eyes twinkling. Emily, would you like to show them what you've been working on? Emily dashed to her backpack, pulling out a carefully rolled blueprint, her first design, a pediatrics prosthetic hand with interchangeable panels that could be customized with different colors and patterns. Kids shouldn't have to feel different, she explained earnestly. They should be able to make their hands match their personality. Bob studied the drawings with serious attention. Bring this to the first R&D meeting, he said. We'll need fresh perspectives like this. By afternoon, the moving truck was fully loaded. Marcus took one last walk through his old house, footsteps echoing in the empty rooms. In the kitchen, he paused at the marks on the doorframe, tracking Emily's growth. Each measurement carefully dated in Catherine's handwriting. We can bring the doorframe, Sarah said from behind him. Install it in Emily's new room. Keep measuring. Marcus turned to face her, struck again by how she always seemed to understand exactly what he needed. Her prototype hands were covered in dust from packing, a smudge of dirt on her cheek from helping Emily plant bulbs in their new garden. She had never looked more beautiful. Marry me, he said suddenly. Sarah's hands stilled. What? Marry me, he repeated, more certain now. Not just because it makes sense with the house and the business, not just because Emily needs a mother, but because I love you, because you understand about remembering and moving forward at the same time. Because you make me believe in second chances and new beginnings, and her prototype hands cupped his face, the touch as gentle as any flesh and bone. Yes, she said simply. Of course, yes. Emily's squeal from the doorway suggested she'd been eavesdropping. She launched herself at them both, creating a family hug that felt like completion. "Can we have the wedding in the garden?" she asked excitedly. "In spring, when Mum's flowers are blooming?" "Perfect," Sarah agreed, her eyes never leaving Marcus's face. A garden wedding with music and family and new beginnings. Later, as they followed the moving truck to their new home, Marcus glanced in his rearview mirror at Emily. She was holding Catherine's photograph in her lap, telling Sarah's picture about all the adventures they were going to have in the new house. "Both our families," she declared confidently. Together, Sarah's prototype hand rested on Marcus's knee as he drove, the metal catching the late afternoon sun. Ahead of them, the farmhouse waited with its promise of workshop space and music rooms, garden plots and family dinners, of prototype fittings and piano lessons, of Emily's engineering dreams and their shared future. Together, Marcus agreed, covering her hand with his. The word felt like a blueprint, like a promise, like a song waiting to be played. 1 year later, the converted barn hummed with activity. Through the tall windows, spring sunlight illuminated the state-of-the-art workshop where Marcus made final adjustments to a specialized prosthetic hand designed for a violinist from the State Symphony. Behind him, Emily's workbench, her 13th birthday present, displayed the latest prototype of her pediatric line, now in testing at 3 children's hospitals. The sound of piano music drifted in from the attached rehabilitation space where Sarah was teaching her afternoon student. Her prototype hands, refined through several iterations, moved across the keys with nearly the same grace she'd possessed before the accident. The melody was familiar, heart and soul, the piece that had marked so many milestones in their journey. "Mr. Wheeler?" George's voice carried from the consultation area. "The team from the Veterans Administration is here." Marcus carefully packed away his tools, smiling at the nameplate on his office door. Marcus Wheeler, Director of Innovation, Carlson's Medical Division. Below it, a smaller plate read, "Emily Wheeler, Junior Designer," her pride in the title evident in how she polished it daily. The VE representatives were already deep in conversation with Sarah when he entered the conference room. Her reputation as both a patient and a success story had made her an invaluable part of their outreach program. "The neural interface adaptation period varies," she was explaining, demonstrating with her own hands. "But with proper support and determination, the results can exceed expectations." She flexed her fingers in a complex piano run. "I'm living proof." The meeting progressed smoothly, the VA team particularly interested in Emily's colorful pediatric designs. "Children of service members," their coordinator explained. "They need solutions that grow with them." After they left, Marcus found Sarah in their garden, her prototype hands gentle among Catherine's perennials. The wedding arch they'd been married under still stood among the flowers, now covered in climbing roses. Emily's wind chimes sang softly in the spring breeze. "Good meeting?" Sarah asked, expertly deadheading a spent bloom. "They want to partner with the pediatric program," Marcus replied, watching her hands move with natural grace. "Emily's going to be insufferable when she finds out. She gets that from her father," Sarah teased. "That same stubborn belief in making the impossible possible." The screen door slammed as Emily burst out of the house, waving a letter. "Dad, Sarah, my design won the Young Innovators Award. They want me to present at the Medical Technology Conference in Chicago." Marcus caught his daughter in a hug, marveling at how much she'd grown. At 13, she was already showing signs of Catherine's height, but her passionate dedication to their work was all her own. "We'll need to celebrate," Sarah declared, her prototype hands already reaching for her phone to share the news. "I'll call Bob and George. Maria from Luigi's has been asking when we'll all come in again." Later that evening, their extended family filled Luigi's back room. Bob and his father, George and his wife, Rita Chen from the Gazette, and James Murphy, their first veteran patient who'd become a close friend. Emily held court at the center of the table, explaining her latest innovations, while Maria kept the garlic bread flowing. "A toast," Bob's father proposed, rising with his glass, "to the Wheeler family, who reminded us that innovation isn't just about technology, it's about heart and soul," Emily added with a grin, making everyone laugh at the familiar pun. After dinner, they walked home through the spring evening, Emily running ahead to check on her latest prototype. Sarah's hand found Marcus's as they followed more slowly, their fingers intertwining with practiced ease. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, "what Catherine would think of all this?" Marcus looked at their home ahead. The farmhouse warm, with lights, the workshop where they helped people rebuild their lives, the garden where two families had become one. Through the window he could see Emily at her workbench, her grandmother's picture watching over her as she sketched new designs. "I think she'd say we got it right," he replied, "taking broken pieces and making something beautiful. That was always her way." Sarah squeezed his hand, the metal warm against his skin. Thomas would have said the same thing about music and healing and second chances. They paused at the garden gate, where Catherine's wind chimes danced in the evening breeze. The workshop. Lights cast long shadows across Sarah's carefully tended flowers, while through the open window, Emily's voice called out about a breakthrough with her latest design. "Second chances," Marcus mused, pulling Sarah close. "Or maybe just the right chance, finally recognized." Above them, the first stars appeared in the spring sky, witnesses to how far they'd come, from broken hands and broken hearts to this moment, this family, this love built on understanding and possibility and the courage to begin again. The recital hall fell silent as Sarah took her place at the grand piano. Her prototype hands gleamed under the stage lights, a testament to love and engineering and the power of second chances. In the front row, Marcus and Emily sat beside Bob and George, while James Murphy cradled his guitar in the wings, waiting for his turn to perform. The piece she'd chosen was ambitious, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, all three movements. Not just the first movement she'd mastered during those early days of healing, but the challenging third movement that had once seemed impossible. Her hands moved across the keys with fluid grace, each note a reminder of how far they'd come. Marcus watched his wife play, remembering late nights in the workshop, countless adjustments and refinements, moments of frustration and triumph. Beside him, Emily beamed with pride, her own prototype designs now helping children across the country rediscover their own possibilities. The final movement filled the hall with its thunderous passion. Sarah's prototype hands dancing across the keys with seemingly impossible speed and precision. In that moment, she wasn't playing despite her prosthetics. She was playing with them, through them, because of them. The music soared and swelled, carrying with it the story of their journey, loss and love, healing and hope, two broken families forging something stronger together. As the last notes faded, the audience rose in a standing ovation, but Sarah's eyes found only Marcus and Emily, her smile radiant with joy and gratitude. Behind them, the sunset streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow lights across her prototype hands, hands that had helped rebuild not just her life, but all of theirs. Later that evening, they gathered in their garden, Catherine's. Wind chimes sang in the spring breeze, while Thomas's roses climbed the wedding arch. Emily played heart and soul on the porch piano, her young hands strong and sure as she crafted their family song. Sarah's prototype hands found Marcus's work roughened, one's cool metal against warm skin. "Thank you," she whispered, though the words seemed inadequate for everything they shared. "For what?" he asked, drawing her close. "For showing me that broken doesn't mean ended, that sometimes life's greatest music comes after the pause." From the porch, Emily's piano shifted into one of her own compositions, a piece she'd written for their wedding, weaving together themes from their past and present. The garden bloomed around them, Catherine's perennials mingling with Thomas's. Roses, creating something new and beautiful from what came before. Marcus kissed his wife softly, feeling the future pulse strong and sure in their joined hands. Above them, the first stars emerged in the deepening twilight, while their daughter's music painted the air with promises kept and dreams renewed. Sometimes love is an ending, they had learned, but sometimes, wonderfully, miraculously, it's a beginning disguised as an ending, waiting for the right hands to craft it into something more beautiful than anyone could have imagined. Emily's song ended on a hopeful chord, echoing across their shared garden like a blessing. The wind chimes answered with their silver song, while Sarah's prototype hands held Marcus's real ones, both equally capable of creating miracles. Together, they had built something extraordinary, not just hands of metal and wire, but a family, forged from faith and fortitude, love and possibility. And in the end, that was the greatest innovation of all.